Welcome to the Future of Arts in Uncertain Times. I'm Emily Roller. I'm going to be moderating this panel. I am a co-founder of Midnight Oil Collective and of Maker States. And I am just so excited. We're going to jump into this very quickly, but first I want to introduce our esteemed guests today and panelists. I'll just go down the row. Right here to my right is Albert Lee. Albert is an active classical music vocalist, innovative educator, a sought-after lecturer, and a native New Havener. Albert Lee has been the Associate Dean for Student Life and Community Engagement at Yale School of Music since 2021. Right next to him is Kate Sheeran. Kate Sheeran is a professional horn player, former executive director of Kaufman Music Center, and former provost and dean of San Francisco Conservatory of Music. She has been the Joan and Martin Messenger Dean of Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester since 2024. Next to her, next to Dean Sheeran is Dean Bronstein. An accomplished pianist, dedicated music educator, and successful chief executive of American Symphony Orchestras, including 10 years at the Dallas Symphony and the St. Louis Symphony. Dean Bronstein has been the dean of Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University since 2014. And finally, Michael C. Wee, the former assistant dean of Harvard College and author of Ask the Experts, How Ford, Rockefeller, and the NEA Changed American Music. Michael Wee is associate professor of musicology and director of the American Music Research Center at the College of Music at University of Colorado, Boulder. So thank you all. So we're going to just jump straight into the heart of things. I think a lot of us are crowded into this room because we know that we're facing, in many ways, unprecedented times, perhaps in some ways, not so unprecedented times. But we are here to really dive into that. We are hoping that this conversation is not like a doom and gloom conversation. And in fact, when we were talking about it as panelists before, we've decided we want it to be doom and bloom. So we will talk about the challenges that are facing us and what their possible implications might be, but we're also going to try to focus the majority of our time on the opportunities that come whenever problems like these arise. And of course, we'll try to leave a little time at the end for questions. I know we're getting started a little late, but we will do what we can. This is a lot of material to cover. So just jumping into it, so many of us are familiar with the recent cuts in funding, the NEA cut, and threats of various funding cuts at universities that are on the table right now. And so I just want us to start by just discussing how these types of funding have supported the universities in the past, because we may have people in the room who may not be as familiar with arts funding structures as they have been in the past, and then also what's changing right now, and what do we see as the likely impacts of these changes in the next 6 months or a year. And Michael, I would love to just kick things off with you, since your expertise is in the NEA.
It's hard to know what will come in the next 6 months or a year or tomorrow. And I think, well, it's great to be here, and it's great to see a room full of people who are interested in and passionate about the future of the arts during these times. I think many of you probably already know that the NEA, along with the NEH, PBS, Institute of Museum, Library Sciences, all of those have been slated to be eliminated by Trump in the skinny budget that's to be voted on in congressional appropriations, that a lot of cuts have already happened in terms of canceled NEA and NEH grants that were promised. There are lawsuits, of course, to challenge those cuts, but that's the landscape that we're living in now. And I think the scariest part of all of these things is not only the loss of leadership, but unlike 2016 when Trump proposed these same cuts and Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, which again is the same case. Recently, earlier this month, the vast majority, if not all, of the NEA directors took deferred resignation packages or early retirements. And so the NEA itself will be, if it continues to exist, if it stays alive, will just be a very, very different agency without the institutional memories and knowledge that has sustained it for the past, since 1965, someone help me do the math, 60 years this year. So I think that that's a lot of doom that we can still equip ourselves with the knowledge of while we think about not just glass half full or rose-tinted glasses, but as we also think about ways that the system has been unequal and unjust for a lot of people leading up to this point. What role does the federal government have in leadership, and what role does innovation or private funding have in all of this, in all of these pieces?
Yeah. Thanks. That's a great place to start. To the deans, could you talk a little bit about also university funding and any changes that are happening right now?
Any shift in funding sources affects all of us, right? Whether we're in higher ed or not. We both happen to be schools of music within universities, as is the School of Music here at Yale. And so any shift that isn't directly, so even if it's not NEA funding, that might be a direct grant to the School of Music, NIH, NSF, NEH, this is shifts at the university, so it's a shift for us. It's the same in nonprofits. I think of, I've spent most of my career in New York City, and California Music Center, my previous role was a combination of K-12 schools, community school, and performing arts presenter. And when COVID hit, I think there are parallels, right? There are many differences, but there are parallels here with funding shifts. We didn't know what would happen because so many funds had to be redirected for healthcare, for instance, for very good reason. And so we were in this sort of holding pattern about when the arts would be, when we'd get to funding the arts in different ways. Because in philanthropy in the US, religion, healthcare, education and many things are above the arts in terms of priority for philanthropy. I think the opportunity for us, and also I will say, NEA funding represents a very significant portion of funding for many arts organizations and many schools. It is also, it has never been big enough, right? It's not like, and one could argue NIH and NSF are not big enough either, but this represents a smaller portion of funding. And so when I worked in New York City, for instance, we always had the most governmental funding from the city, then the state, then federal. And so in some ways that's a salve, although when you need that $25,000 and it's not there and for your nonprofit or your presentation, that's very significant, so I don't mean to diminish that. I will say that what I learned during COVID, I think we all did, is the more we can partner and work across sectors and not just in nonprofit, that we're, sometimes in the arts we stay within nonprofit, but we show our value in so many different ways. That's when more and different resources become apparent and available so that we can continue to enrich the schools and communities where we are.
Yeah, so I would just say that we all know that universities are facing unprecedented challenges today. And, specifically, when I look at where I am at Hopkins, Peabody is part of Hopkins, one of the 10 divisions of Johns Hopkins. There is while we do not have to worry about certain things, we do not get federal funding the way most of our peers across the university do. We have a large population, for example, of international students. And there are 1 million plus international students across the country that could be impacted by anything that might happen around visas, or we see obviously all the saber rattling going on around this issue. Very challenging. Endowment tax, which there is currently an endowment tax. It's very small, 1.4%. You have to have an endowment over a certain threshold. In the billions of dollars. But the talk now is the proposals on the table are to raise that tax from anywhere between 10 and 30. I think 30% was the last number I saw on the earnings of endowments. So as you can imagine, that would have a major impact on an institution and a major impact on donors also in terms of how they think about their philanthropy. More broadly, I would just say that I'll put on my Johns Hopkins hat for a minute and say that the threat around research funding, for example, in science foundation funding and all of the NEH and all of these things, there is you can't even begin to anticipate what the fallout from that could be. When you think about clinical trials, when you think about solving, and really curing certain diseases, when you think about science funding and technology funding and all of the big ideas, so many big ideas since World War II began in universities as a partnership with government funding. And so this is the potential to do damage, plus the fact you have to think about the fact that the universities are, if you think about, one of the great exports of, this country is the talent from our universities and the ideas that go out from our universities around the world. And similarly, one of the great imports is the people that come from around the world to study at American universities. And so that is very much under threat as well.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting that you bring up the funding in the other fields as well. Historically, the arts have had much less of that funding than those fields have, despite the fact that I would argue that much of what we're contributing is also very important to the very fabric of our country. Albert, could you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing as well, about the uncertainties that are currently facing, maybe even thinking about artists that you're dealing with directly and yourself as a working artist?
So in the midst of all that's going on, I think for me as an artist, and for me being an artist is core, I bring that to all of the other work that I do. Uncertain times for me as an artist have been all the times. I think I started out, in the field of music in a sort of in an uncertain way, and I have made my way uncertainly, if you will. So, what is certain, however, is that creative culture never stops, and creative culture never stops whether there's money on the table or not. I can only speak for the community that bore me and reared me, but the church that I grew up in, walking distance from here on the corner of Chapel and Dwight, was a very traditional Methodist church where we sang chant, and we sang hymns, and we sang anthems, and we sang oratorio, and we sang every form of gospel music you could imagine. The diversity was there, the education was there, the art was there, the money wasn't. And so what we really have to think about is where our values are really. And I think in some instances, and I am guilty because I'm a part of these organizations, we will often protect our institutional salary and tell an artist, here's $500. And so I think we really, 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 in these uncertain times, have to do some soul searching. The people who are leading. And I say that as someone who's a baby leader. Like, associate dean. Associate dean. So, I'm trying to support my dean, but I'm also going into his office with a mirror going, you said this, but here's what you're doing. Tell me what you need from me. Because if this is not, if we're gonna play this, talk to me, please. You know what I'm saying. Y'all know what I'm saying. And I'm grateful to have a dean that I can actually do that with and do it openly and do it honestly, and it doesn't work against me. But these hard conversations are necessary. I'm gonna say it again. Art is always happening. Our real issue is with capitalism. Let's be honest. We're all trying to make money. We're all operating as if money is scarce. We're all operating as if the things that actually make us the most human are not free. So we have to do better, and that starts in the mirror, not blaming everybody else.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think it's really important. Every point that you just made to highlight really these problems have been around for a long time. I think that some of this recent activity has the potential to exacerbate things. As Dean Bronstein pointed out as well, the issues with international students and other people who are coming to this country to try to develop their own craft are certainly at risk right now. But on the other hand, so many things have gone unaddressed for a while. And just wondering if anybody else would like to add anything else that you have seen as a long unaddressed or underaddressed issue facing the arts. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I would. There are a couple of things I think that are, in that bucket for me. One is certainly what does the field look like, and I'm talking about particularly from the perspective of the classical arts, and the failure of our field in many ways to become truly diverse. And when one considers demographic shifts and what the country will look like demographically within the next 30 to 40 years, there is I think our field is woefully unprepared for how to reach new audiences and build new audiences. The second piece of this is and we are doing a lot of work at Peabody, which I won't take the time to talk about here today, but around that issue, because we think it's so important. The second issue is, I would say, creativity. I think arts organizations are, and having been around a lot of large arts organizations throughout my career, it's a little ironic in a sense, because we think of arts organizations as being creative enterprises. But in fact, they are largely risk adverse. And they are a lot, and that part of that has to do simply with the inability to, do serious R&D and really develop initiatives and try things out. And it does come back to a funding issue. And the third piece I would say, and this comes back to the artists, I think. Obviously, I'm in the business of training artists, and I saw this as, having run several large American orchestras earlier in my career, that I think artists, when they come into the field, are extremely well trained, in core skills, but not well trained in terms of how they communicate, how they, how do they use digital resources? How do they find an audience? How do they pitch an idea? Again, these are all things that we have changed our curriculum actually at Peabody around, because we think it's so important. But I think that, this is still, because this is a major culture shift in how artists see themselves and how the field sees itself. But those three things I think are key, and those were around long before the fact that we face some significant new challenges now. Just one statistic for you, if you look at orchestras today across this country, they are about 3%, 4% maybe, are players of color, and black and brown. And that is unchanged from 30 years ago when that field started to talk about this as an issue. So it gives you a very real sense of what the challenges are and why it's so important for those challenges to be addressed. The fault lies actually with the music schools and the pre-music schools, because that's where the work needs to begin and needs to start, because it's too late by the time people are trying to break into the field.
Thank you for bringing the education piece into it, because I think a lot of what we're seeing in creative spaces, especially with regard to wanting to diversify the field, lots of organizations have done good work in their small realm without adding to the systemic need, which is fundamental K through 12 education, and that music and creative arts needs to be core in K through 12 education. We understand that in this room, we know that, but it's weird to me that we can get on a Zoom and we can get on a call about lots of things, but all of these arts associations have never gotten on a call to talk about in a comprehensive way, how are we lobbying local, state, and federal government at the same time to demand that human beings be given spaces to understand creativity in their developmental years in school. If we know this is necessary and we are not going to do it, then you said something that I loved, is when funding starts to change, everyone is affected. But what we often do is just make sure our kids are taken care of. What we do is we make sure the kids in our area are taken care of. And those over there, well, their people are just going to have to do it. And I think we have to take real accountability for the fact that we have failed as a society to make sure our children are taken care of and to make sure our elderly are respected.
Anything? Yeah.
I just, picking up on what my brilliant colleagues are saying, I just believe with every fiber of my being that if a young child has the arts in a meaningful way from the beginning, their whole life is better, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. We all believe the same thing. I think the ways we keep hitting roadblocks, right? So I'll use New York State as an example. The amount that is required within public school curriculum in New York State, amount that is required for the arts is so minimal compared to even just learning an instrument at a functional level, right? And that we should keep working on that, and it will take a long time. I also think the dividends that would be paid if people invested in, okay, let's all get together and decide that we're going to have a community arts school in every county that serves all of the students. It actually doesn't take that much money, right? But it takes all of us working together. And that gets back to also, I think one of the things that we haven't addressed in the arts, and it also is funding, and again, time for R&D and all kinds of things. We're less efficient in the arts than almost any other sector because we don't have the time or the resources to stop and fix it, right? We don't have the best software. We don't have the best systems. We have great people who are scrapping together all kinds of things to make it work. So if we could work together to figure out what are the systems and resources that we can pool and work across different schools and across the lifespan of a musician or an artist or whatever that is, I think that's the way we move it forward. But it takes like a tidal wave of collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. And I can tell we're eager to kind of move into to this Bloom side of things, so I appreciate that. But before we do, Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add in terms of things that have gone unaddressed?
I'll piggyback on what everyone else is saying, and I'll also reiterate that we can't give up on the public. We can't give up on public education, and there can be the temptation every time the federal government pulls back on education or on arts to fill it up with private funds. And that can often be the Band-Aid, that can often be a solution, but it can't be the solution to address wealth inequality that has been happening in this country since after the Second World War, and the ways that wealth inequality mirror arts education and public education inequality and our fights for these basic public goods. So yes, the uncertainty and the precarity and all of these things have been with us for the past few decades. While this may be a moment to galvanize forces to advocate for broader structural change, and also I wanted to just note one slight difference with this current moment and attacks on arts funding that are different from attacks on science funding is the attack on what the image and history of the United States is as connected with the MAGA slogan. And with the attacks on arts funding and cultural funding, it's an attempt to just completely rewrite and exclude the histories of all of the people who have made the United States what it is. That is a little bit different in this current moment than it has been. I mean, there are echoes of it from the 1990s and the culture wars and all of that. But this moment is a little bit different with those parts as well.
I'm really glad you raised that because I think that is something that is different. It is the way. In fact, we just had our graduation, and I talked about this issue in my comments to our graduates because I think this is unique in this time. This idea that is artistic expression under threat. Actually, if you think about the Kennedy Center, what happened there, and the purge of the Kennedy Center, and you can make historical analogies, some of which would probably sound fairly dramatic, but it is a step like that is a step towards really attacking expression and self-expression that is key to artists, and I think that is something that is with us now. Maybe that wasn't with us. It's different in that sense.
Yeah.
No, I was just to your point. A lie is always going to beget a lie, and the country has always needed to grapple with the lies of its founding, the truths as well. But we've always had to grapple with that, and I am grateful for influences like James Baldwin, who has helped me to understand my place as an artist in society, and that my place as an artist in society is really a carrier of the truth, and really the truth of the human experience, the truth of the human journey, and that truth is broad, and it's deep, and it's uncomfortable, and it's messy, and it's ugly, but the more we can be honest about our truths, the more that vulnerability can lead us to actually connect to one another, so we build societies and systems that actually serve us.
I love that framing of an artist as a carrier of truth. And building on that, then let's shift into the bloom. So what opportunities are there out there right now? What can we do as carriers of the truth to meet the moment? And to tell stories that I think are essential, right? It's incredibly important that expression is not shut down at this exact moment, more important than ever. So what can we do? What opportunities are we seeing?
So I'll just, as a performer, I'll talk about some of the things that I'm working on that for me are incredibly fun. This coming December, I'm involved in a world premiere of an opera that is a similar story to the recent movie Sinners that Ryan Coogler just put out. That movie was incredible. But it's a similar story. It will be premiered by a small sort of experimental opera company in DC. It's really cool to do new music. It's cool to be creating new stories. In November, I'm actually going backwards and doing a William Grant Still opera. Many people don't know William Grant Still's prolific output as a composer and as a composer of opera specifically. And so doing the first opera that was ever broadcast on PBS by a black composer, A Bayou Legend was his. I'm doing that in November with Vermont Opera. And then doing another song thing in Nebraska in September. Ooh, nice. But the thing I'm most excited about, and this is my students' fault. Actually, I just saw one of them over there. Hi, Maya. The teaching innovation is about as inspiring as anything that you could do. Teaching career development is about as inspiring as anything you can do. And I always tell people, you cannot teach anything that you have not done yourself. And so I am working on a solo project that is a kind of an autoethnographic rendering of my own life in music, using the church I grew up in as the backdrop. And so it'll be a story about New Haven, it'll be a story about me, it'll be a story about my family and my journey, and we will see where that lands. But that's me just being creative. So the opportunities are there, and if you wish to do them.
I'll just quickly, that I think the opportunity, you just gave so many great examples of finding your specific path, where in the 20th century we sort of, and at least in classical music, we sort of got way too specific, right? So if you're not that violinist in that group, you failed. If you're not in that particular seat, you failed. That's not how art works. It's not how it's ever worked, right? So the opportunity to completely get rid of that myth is the most important thing we can do in this moment. It's also necessary for society, because how do we process the things? Through seeing ourselves reflected in other people, through other people's stories, right? And so the more we're working on a lot of projects where students can use their own life experience to connect with music and connect with other people. The more we can do that, the more you're honing that now, both to tell your own story and to reflect the society we want to see, right? Sometimes that's what art can do, can be that hope and show something that we're looking for. So those are the opportunities we're trying to lean into for our students as they go out and be their own artists.
Yeah, for me there are two things. One is an institutional view of this, and that is to say that I think it's important to speak up. We have seen over the last 3 to 4 months, and this is something else that I think is different today, actually, is silence from law firms, silence from universities, silence from nonprofits, silence from corporations. That's starting to change, actually. It is starting to change, and I think it is really important, though, to call out the things that that are happening, and people are afraid a lot of the time to do that. But I think that we are starting to see that change. The other thing is I guess, and this comes back to, for me, something that has little to do with the moment and really has to do with, again, how we think about putting young artists out into the world, and this idea of, doing away with this idea of what the perfect job is. Which isn't to say, playing in an orchestra is a wonderful thing. That's a great career path, and teaching at a university is in having students is a wonderful career path. But there are lots of other things that creative artists do as they make their way, and that's everything from how do you use music in healthcare settings to the use of the arts in social service settings and things like that. And there's so many ways to build a really impactful, fulfilling kind of career that I think that is beyond the sort of the traditional places that artists have seen themselves. And again, I think this is it's up to the institutions, our institutions, to train people to think that way, and to give them permission to think that way, and to give them the skills to be able to do that kind of thing as best we can. Because I think there is a you really can create your own future, and I think it's our job to teach our students to be able to do that, I think.
Thanks. Michael, did you want to add?
I was going to start with the lower hanging fruit, but as these wonderful people were talking, I was inspired to maybe flip it around and go for that high hanging fruit of questioning that assumption of why we think it's okay or even possibly good to live in a society where those at the top are determining what is good, meaningful, innovative, creative, important art. When we can question that assumption of who controls the financial resources to make these decisions, or even the symbolic recognition to determine these things, and instead of flip that around to a bottom-up model, then what kind of art world would that be, and how can we turn this current moment of crisis into one that is instead of reform or possibly even revolution? So we can start off with that high-hanging fruit, and maybe, and I also realize and understand that not everyone in this room would agree with me that part of the problem is wealth hoarding and nepotism. For those who do agree that wealth hoarding and nepotism is a problem, then that might be a question that we ask. Again, not everyone would agree, but I mean, for those who might be of a similar mindset. And then from there, then we can tease out what are the lower hanging fruit strategies and reforms that systems can make to be more democratic, to be more transparent, to allow for a greater good for a greater number of people than superstar systems or systems that really venerate a handful of people at the expense of broader participation, broader art making, all of those things. So that is hopefully a more bloom side of turning a crisis into a moment of pausing, reflection, and an action that maybe some people will feel a little bit better about in their hearts.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would love to just push on that just a little bit. Like, thinking about a bottom-up approach then, when we're thinking about that, because I think there's threads of that in what everybody was saying, and not, feeling like you have to have the top chair in an orchestra, right? In Albert's work and thinking about like getting work that you're creating and that you're excited about out into the world. What does like in a concrete way? How do we enact a bottom-up approach?
How do we enact it?
An example would be great. I love a model.
So, where is Frances here?
I'm here.
Where is she? So I'm going to use you as an example, actually, because no, I mean, this still sticks with me. When Frances was at Peabody, which is where we met, she came to me with a project she was working on, her opera, Stinny. And to me, what she did with that, with the composition of the piece, the subject matter, the time in which she did it, it was post Freddie Gray in Baltimore and pre George Floyd, I guess, yeah. Height of the Black Lives Matter moment in many ways, and the piece, I mean, the subject matter is a tragic subject matter, but the way she put this work together, the way she produced the work, the place she produced it, the way she approached doing this project, really from the ground up, is, I think, it's, for me, and it was not a perfect piece. I mean, you're with the work of a young composer. There was many wonderful things in it, but the point is that here you were doing something that was really quite extraordinary, actually. I think in terms of, in that moment, the involvement of the Stinney family. I mean, it was everything that art should be, actually. And so, I use that example all the time, actually, as, I have more current examples I can use, but I love that example because I think it really is, when we talk about the relevance of opera and doing it in a way that really relates to people, I can't think of a better example than what you did with that piece.
Yep. Any other examples people would like to point to? Great. Well, I would love to open this up for questions from the audience. So we'll come around with microphones. So I'm just going to start rotating around here. So I'll go over here.
Hi, I'm Colin Edwa. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's a really, really important one to have, especially now. My question is for Fred. I think you said something along the lines of, we should speak out, and I agree. And I was sort of thinking while you were speaking, well, who is we? And I'm thinking of, because some of us navigate through different levels of power. So my question to you would be, which communities do you feel could be more effective when it comes to the we should speak out?
I think it is the folks that are in the positions of leading institutions. I think is really important. And it isn't to say, by the way, that we need to or should react to everything, that we shouldn't. Because if we do that, then you can't react to anything, actually. But I think and the moment has to be right, And I'll use myself as an example, okay? I'll use myself as an example and say that I didn't run out to write an op-ed about the Kennedy Center issue when it happened. I actually did write a draft of it and decided, for a lot of reasons, the university I'm part of, part of what the universities are trying to do is you want to stay under the radar, you don't want to draw fire either. But I did make the decision, and it was a conscious decision that I was going to, when it came to the graduation speech, I was going to use that as a forum to actually talk about this issue. And I did. So I think the right time and the right place, and it's not the same for everybody, but I think generally speaking, we have to think about it from that perspective. We've got to think about, across all sectors of society, being willing to call out and say what we see. And if I can also just say one other thing that from the university perspective, I would be the first. Universities are not perfect, and in fact, I think universities have done a poor job in many ways of representing a breadth of views, political views, in the professoriate, across the academy. I can say that about Johns Hopkins University, and it's something the university is really working on, and I think generally universities have not done a good job of that. So I think we are far from perfect, but that is still a different issue. Saying we need to do better in that is a different issue from, an institution or various institutions across the society being attacked?
I was just thinking as you were talking, and this idea of speaking out. When you mentioned it the first time, the first thing I thought of was, 5 years ago this time there was a lot of speaking out going on, and it's pretty quiet now. And it sort of throws me, and so then I say, okay, well, what is my responsibility? And I think the question is how one speaks out, and whether we speak out with concerted action, whether we speak out with, however, I think we have to be wise about how we speak out. In my own performing, I try to be super, super clear about messaging. And then nuanced in the way that I deliver it, so the broadest amount of people can potentially hear it. But I'm tired of hearing people talk. I'm just tired of it, because the words have not meant much. Especially it is interesting how 5 years ago in the DEI push, we were recognizing how not diverse we were. And now we have thrown that whole paradigm out the window to now talk about viewpoint diversity. And now this is the big thing. Come on. And I'm not saying it's not a real thing, but come on, stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Because it's a joke. Stop.
If I'm going to be super art-centric about this, right, that it is our job to create space for artists to express themselves, right? We can't lose that. And that can't go away. And so it might not be me saying something. It might be me making space for someone to do what it is that's in their heart that's important, or things like that. So I think that's something all of us in this room can continue to protect.
Thank you. Let's take a couple more questions.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriel. Thank you for all the thoughts. Just brilliant, brilliant. I don't know if I necessarily agree with what I'm about to prompt, but I just want you guys to explore it a little bit. Like, this idea of relying on federal funding, city funding, state funding, that evaporates, right? Let's just say, overnight. Let's grieve it, but isn't it up to us as leaders to start to source funding from other places? Like, I feel as though that comes with leadership. I feel as though that comes with entrepreneurialism. I feel like that is an essential moving part, is going with the motion and reallocating and sort of finding what our base is. And I do, Albert, kind of reflecting what you're saying, I feel as though maybe harping on what was isn't necessarily the most proactive, right? I agree, let's grieve. But I guess I'm curious, isn't that on us, what leaders of institutions or businesses, to start to kind of call on our base and say, hey, put your money where your mouth is, talk to the funders, the independent funders. There's not lack of money, it's just being allocated elsewhere.
I do agree with what you're saying, right? That this is a moment, and for us, it's a little more, it's sort of unsurmountable to think about it in healthcare or science in a way that it might be more possible in the arts right now, because the sources weren't that big in the first place. But again, like COVID, I've been thinking about all of our funders. We just have to stay close and be super honest. And actually, we saw a lot of shifts during COVID from private foundations, especially, where instead of being overly specific about what you could apply for, that they trusted leadership and they trusted institutions, and they got to know the places and the activity and the people they were supporting, and invested. So I think that's absolutely the opportunity. We also tend to be a little, on the nonprofit side of arts, we tend to be a little allergic to talking about revenue generation, and we should get over that, because there are all kinds of, who gets through their day without listening to music or seeing art or any, nobody. So somebody's making money on it, and we have to find the new innovative ways where we're reclaiming this and developing the new systems where revenue generation goes back to artists and arts institutions and schools.
I completely agree that the opportunity in the arts exists to because at the end of the day, the federal funding is a minuscule portion of the funding apparatus anyway. As important as the NEA is, it has very little impact on larger organizations and even medium-sized organizations. It tends to be smaller organizations. And but where I think it's different is in the, NIH funding apparatus, or science funding. And again, when one looks back over the last 80 years and the incredibly successful partnership between public funding, government funding, and higher educational, American universities, where so much of the progress has been made because of that joint partnership, that will be much more difficult to replace.